start today on the 26th, Friday, 26 March 2021. A wonderful day here at Miss Mulligan's favorite cafe. She wants me to call her Carol, so I'm going to call her Carol. Else it'll be trouble. But we're at the northern end of Manhattan.
Yes,
Near the northernmost part.
it's the Indian Road Farm. That's the new name. Indian Road Farm.
The area is called the
this
yeah,
restaurant.
Yeah, because I thought the realtors had
No.
gotten to that too.
No.
So it's
No,
the
that-
Indian Road Farm, nice cafe, and we're sitting here with friends, Rosa Yolanda Pineda and Jordan, who's assisting with the camera, and we just wanted to have Miss Carol Mulligan speak about her experiences living here in New York. You grew up here as well?
Oh no, we migrated to New York City in August of 1960.
From?
New Orleans, Louisiana.
Your family did?
Oh yes.
Right.
Okay, so that's a very interesting story. That summer my father had an opportunity to come to New York City to work for a family for whom he had worked for in New Orleans, to make ready their house. The head of the household worked for a major oil company and had been relocated here to New York. So my dad was here for 2 months, and when he came home, within 3 or 4 hours, he said, guess what, we're moving to New York City. And we all started to laugh because we all knew enough about New York to know that.
What did you think of it? Negatively or
No, positively.
Uh-huh.
Who wouldn't want to live here? We knew about Broadway, we knew about museums and concerts, and all the things that we couldn't do in New Orleans.
What was your father's occupation?
He was a house painter.
A house painter.
So while he was here, he discovered, or he learned, that he could join the Painters Union. And before coming home, he had already secured a job and rented an apartment. So when he said we were moving, he was serious because
Where did you all move to? That
to the
was,
Bronx.
Oh, you moved from
New Orleans to
one
the
of the
Bronx.
parishes in New Orleans
To the Bronx.
to the Bronx. Which parish were you all living in?
In New Orleans, the Orleans Parish.
New Orleans parish.
Okay.
Did your father, as an African American, have any problem joining the union?
No, not here. That's why he came. In New Orleans, he couldn't. And in New Orleans, this is now the 60s. I grew up in the Jim Crow South. I was born in 1941.
Sure.
Everything was segregated. Everything. Now, what was interesting about my neighborhood was that whites and Negroes, because back then we were Negroes, we weren't African Americans or black or colored, we were Negroes.
Well, you were colored at one point.
We were, but at the
Went through
time
all
we were
stages.
Negroes. I
Yeah.
came to the world, my birth certificate said Negro. Okay, so we lived in the same community in that particular area, but everything was segregated. You could stand in one public school, look out the window and see the other. And the same thing with the Catholic Church. We went to St. Peter Pueblo, which was located here, and if you walk to the corner and just around a bit was St. Anne's Church for white people.
And
Everything was, well, that was true all over the country, not just the South.
no, but that was in New Orleans.
That was in New Orleans. But the churches were segregated here as well. Because when we came in 1960,
Of course.
There was segregated.
Yeah. Well,
And
Dr.
the
King
myth
said
was
it's the
the
most
myth
segregated
was
hours.
the myth was that segregation ended at the Mason-Dixon line. We soon came to learn that it ends at the Canadian.
Sure.
At the,
Yeah, two things.
Okay.
John Oliver Killens.
So, but my story is interesting in that I was about to start my sophomore year at Xavier University
In New Orleans.
in New Orleans.
The historically black college is Catholic.
That's
the
right.
only one that's Catholic.
Sister Catherine, Mother Catherine Drexel was now Saint Mother Catherine Drexel.
She's now been sainted. Yes.
Yes.
She came from a very posh family.
Oh yes, she came from. She took all that
They had
money
an
that she
investment
inherited,
firm, Drexel Burnham,
and she invested it in building schools for
for blacks and Indians.
blacks and Indians.
Yeah.
Yes.
American Indians.
So
yeah.
you're one of the few people who know her history. Well,
No, her history is there for people to know if they want to know it.
no.
They should know that there's a historically black college.
They may know that, but they don't know that.
I don't think they even know that. I don't think people know that.
Okay.
Because we have the fewest number of people of African descent in the United States are Catholic. That's the smallest denomination
We
of
are
blacks.
very small,
Yeah.
and it was, yes, and most of us,
I
and
think
many
it's
of
a
us
few
lived,
100,000, that's it.
and many of us lived in New Orleans because New Orleans was a Catholic city.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, my granddad was paying my tuition, and I thought about it. I said, wait, this is the middle of August. If I move to New York City now, I won't go to school in September. I mean, I was smart enough to know it takes, you can't just move to a city and go to a university. And then and because my granddad was paying my tuition, I said, I'm not going to go. My mom started to cry, and my dad said,
Were you an only child?
no, I'm the oldest of 7.
Oh, you're the oldest of 7.
The youngest was 5 at the time.
I'm one of 7.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of 7. And so my dad said, don't listen to the crazy girl, where is she going to stay? Because the grandfather who was paying my tuition didn't live in New Orleans. He lived 60 miles outside of New Orleans in a rural community. And it was not possible to commute back and forth daily, and he couldn't afford living there. And so I got lucky. The family for whom I had babysat for since my junior year in high school invited me to live with them, and in exchange for room and board and $10 a week, and that meant 3 meals because they bought food so I could pack a lunch. I did the babysitting from 5, I had to be home Monday through Friday by 5 to take care of the little preschooler. And I babysat one day each weekend, and that's how I was able to make that happen.
And Xavier.
As Xavier.
And you were finishing at Xavier.
I graduated, yes, in 1963, but I came to New York that December of 1960 for the first time at the end of the semester, and fell in love with the city.
And but your family stayed.
Yeah, of course.
And then you went back.
Yes. My parents died here in New York City. They never went back to New Orleans.
No, I was just trying to get the chronology.
I would just come for holidays and summers, and then go back until I finished school. But this was my official home, my official address. And then, but here's what made it so. Here's when I realized my dad was not insane, but that he was a visionary. I will never forget, as long as I live, the first day I went to the Metropolitan Museum, because I had never been inside of a museum in my entire life.
In the South.
Because we were not allowed. We were not allowed inside the museum.
Well, can I just ask you, you couldn't go? Weren't there hours? I mean, I
no,
know.
we were not allowed. No, not
in
at
New
all.
Orleans.
And not just in New Orleans. Okay, what?
I mean, everything was segregated.
We were not allowed to go to museums, concert halls, not even to the city zoo.
Could you go to the library?
We had a library for blacks.
Right.
We didn't go to the same library that a white person would go to. Even the libraries were segregated. Some libraries were for blacks only, some were for whites only. Yes, but we did have public libraries.
So it was it was de facto apartheid, is what prevailed in the South. That's what it
Everything,
was.
yes, even transportation.
Yeah.
We sat in the back, the Rosa Parks story. That's not.
Although the great black historian J. Rogers talks about it, he said, he commented when he went to the South, he's Jamaican born. He said there was transportation, some municipal public transportation, in which Jim Crow took a front seat, so they were sitting in the front. It wasn't good that they sat in front. There was segregation in the front, and blacks were sitting in front of the engine, and then whites were over there. So all the soot, all of the debris and everything, blacks were. So he said, Riley he said, it's the only time black people go first, but it's not a first you'd want. So it's a new book that's out called Travel While Black. It was just reviewed in the Times this week. But yeah, I didn't realize that in New Orleans it was that grim. I know the Deep South. Well, I guess Louisiana.
It's the Deep South.
Yeah.
No, but everything was segregated. Water fountains.
Sure.
Bathrooms, dressing rooms in departments.
Graveyards, separate Bibles. I collect the various, apartheid practices. I mean, there were separate Bibles that people swore on in the courthouse.
Yes.
Of course, separate cemeteries, which lead to an interesting question. There probably is a separate heaven as well.
No. That's.
Well, if you look at the way racialists, if you follow their thinking, they clearly believe there's a different heaven. I mean, there's a separate heaven. And someone said the other day that they had interviewed in one of these sort of salvation and deliverance type churches a woman who had had a vision of heaven, and it was very interesting. It was a white woman that the person was speaking to, and she said she'd gone to heaven and it looked so great and everything. And somebody asked her, "Were there any black people? Do you see any black people in the heaven in your vision?" And she said, "I didn't look in the kitchen. No, I didn't see any." So I mean, I shouldn't have to tell you that, because I'm sure you know. I mean, if you follow the logical conclusion of that thinking, you know, it would lead you to clearly believe. They don't think they're going to be mingling in heaven. We know that there's one heaven. We know there's one God. We know there's one, you know.
And we're all children of God.
That's right. But yeah, but that's very interesting. So I wanted to ask you, when you were at Xavier, I didn't know you were there. There was a very prominent lady, very fair-skinned black lady with blue eyes, very active in the civil rights movement, very quiet. I wish I had had a chance to talk to her. I think she's now deceased. But she was part of this student nonviolent coordinator. She came from Xavier. She happened to come from a Catholic family.
But I think that was post my
That was
graduation.
Diana Nash.
Yeah, but she wasn't there when I
She was there after. She was there before you.
Oh, you?
Not after you. She was there before you.
Before me? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
She wasn't there when I was there.
Yeah. She would be today. I don't believe she's alive. She would be about 80 something, 88.
Okay.
Yeah. But she was part of that. She was already part of that. She was part of SNCC, Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. And I'm sure you graduated in '63.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she graduated, I'm sure, before that, because that young generation, well, they were young then, John Lewis and others, they were already pretty much, you know, John Lewis at March on Washington, he was 23 years old,
Right.
and he had already finished college. I think he was in graduate school.
Yeah, John Lewis is what was. If he were alive today, would he be?
He just died a year ago.
I know that, but he was.
Yeah, he did about 86, 85.
80. Okay.
Yeah, he'd be in his 80s. Yeah.
He would be in his 80s. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he was a few years older than I am.
yeah. So you left Xavier and then you came to New York,
Of course.
Xavier University in New Orleans, and came to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And you started working?
No.
Okay.
I joined the Papal Volunteers. Pope John the 23rd was the Pope at that time, and he encouraged us to share our wealth, our education with people who needed support.
Can we just back up a second? His Holiness Pope John the 23rd died in August of '63. No. He died he called the Second Vatican Council into order.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in '62, but he died in '63,
I thought it was later, but I don't remember the exact date.
because that council closed in '65. He had already passed on.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I learned about the Papal Volunteers.
For our audience, this is I just wanted to just say,
It's a
Roman
Catholic.
Catholic.
It's a Roman Catholic
Lay group.
Lay group. We were all lay people, men and women. I made a decision to join. I seriously thought about joining the Peace Corps, but because of the racial relationships at that time, my first choice was to go to Africa. I thought I could not go to Africa representing the Peace Corps, given the way African Americans were being treated in this country at that time. So I joined the Papal Volunteers. And
The Papal Volunteers.
Papal, meaning Pope.
Yeah,
Papal,
sure.
Papal
I'm
Volunteers.
just saying it for the audience.
Yes. So the challenge was that a parish had to sponsor you, and that meant the parish would have to pay your transportation to and from the country, provide you with a stipend of $70 a month, and buy medical insurance for you the entire time you were there. And of course, all of the black parishes in New Orleans were not, well, just financially couldn't do that.
They could. None of the parishes could afford.
No, they couldn't
to
afford it.
Right.
Our parishes were very, very.
But it's interesting that you're saying that you couldn't join the newly formed Peace Corps, which President Kennedy started, and it got underway in '61. But then what about the church and its historic, and institutional racism?
I understand. But the expression of racism at that time was not coming directly from the church, it was coming from the community at large. And so we had to find a sponsor, the chaplain of the university, Father Wagner, heard about Father James Duffy out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who was heading up a paper volunteer group. And without telling me, traveled out to Milwaukee to speak to Father Duffy to ask if I could join his group. And of course, Father Duffy said yes. And then the concern was a sponsor. Father Duffy said that wouldn't be a problem. So a parish will sponsor Carol here in Milwaukee. And sure enough, St. Sebastian Parish sponsored me sight unseen. They had never seen me. They made a commitment to provide the financial backing that we needed in order to do that. However, we spent 6 months in preparation in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. The women lived in one house, men in another house. Where we took our meals. The meal table was common. We all ate, and we also had to work to support that stay. No one would hire me to teach because Fond du Lac, Wisconsin was a very white community. The only other African American that I saw was a young man who worked at Sears Roebuck. He didn't live in Fond du Lac, but he traveled in each day for his job.
From where?
And so,
from Milwaukee?
From Wisconsin, not from Milwaukee, because the distance was too far. And so I was able to get a job at the hospital, Marion Hospital. I worked as a nursing aide in pediatrics. I had a great time. And
So as a papal,
while we were
papal
training,
missionary.
while we were learning the language and studying the history and culture of Brazil, we did that prior to going down to Brazil. We had to financially support ourselves, and so we did.
So again, it's the group.
What do you- I
Papal
don't-
missionary?
What are you asking me? What is the papal?
What was the name of the group?
We were papal volunteers. That's what we were called.
How long did the papal volunteers, did it exist before that? Because I don't think it's...
It was a new organization when I joined. It was relatively new. Maybe it had been just a year old.
Okay.
I learned of it in my senior year at Xavier. So,
And then
I
it
joined a year
it
after.
doesn't exist anymore, does it? the
Oh,
group?
no.
Yeah, so how long did it last? About 15, 20 years?
15, maybe 20.
I wonder what the inspiration for it was. You think it was Kennedy's Peace Corps?
No, it was Pope John the 23rd. That's why we were called the papal volunteers.
No, I understand
It was,
that.
oh
But
no, it was not JFK because
no,
he-
I know. But I'm
because
just
he
saying,
was
I
not
wonder,
on the
was that
cutting
the
edge.
inspiration for it? Was it
No.
modeled after that? Because you
No.
went to another country. That's
No.
what the Peace Corps did. It
I
sent people
understand
to-
that. I understand that.
And by the way, why Brazil?
Well, that's where this archdiocese of Leyden, we have been invited by the Archbishop of Fortaleza. I lived in the city of Fortaleza in the state of Ceará, and the Archbishop of Fortaleza asked for papal volunteers to come to his city to work in his community.
Sure.
And that's why I was sent to Brazil. I went with another woman named Audrey, and I lived with volunteers from Canada, Belgium, and I was from the United States, and there was a Brazilian. There were 4 of us in the house. And then there was an American couple from Fond du Lac that was assigned to the interior, Brenda and Jim Nelson. And so they were also from the same Milwaukee Archdiocese.
So how many years were you, or
2
months?
2 years.
2 years.
Mhm.
So that's from 63 to 65.
No, I went down in 64. I remember I did the training in
Preparation,
Fond du Lac.
sure.
Yeah.
So 64 to 66?
Mhm.
Wow. Did you, I mean, that was, so much was going on in the civil rights movement here in the States during that time.
And of course, for the first time ever in my life, I encountered a poverty like no other. I had never seen people live in such impoverished conditions.
In Brazil?
In Brazil, in all of the Jim Crow South, even in rural Louisiana, everybody had a house. Everybody had enough food. They were not wealthy, but they were not. I had never seen that kind of poverty ever before in my life.
Right.
I now see it here in New York City, here in England. I just have to, every day I step outside of my door, I see someone sleeping on the sidewalk
Yeah, but
or
that's,
asking for food.
yeah, but you wouldn't see what you see in the developing world, even up here.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah. And also back then, you had grinding poverty in Mississippi and elsewhere in West Virginia.
It was nothing like what we saw.
No doubt,
Brazil,
yeah.
respectfully.
What city in Brazil were you? Brasilia?
I was in Fortaleza, in the state of Ceará. Fortaleza, in the northeast. I was in the northeast, which was the most challenging area financially at that time in Brazil. We went down to São Paulo. It was like going to a European city. Or Rio de Janeiro, because we spent some time in Rio, 3 months in Rio before we went to our assignments, in further training in terms of becoming more sensitive and more knowledgeable about the culture. And
were you
history of
homesick
Brazil.
or?
No, I was doing what I wanted to do. I wasn't homesick, and I was not suffering. And the greatest gift was that I went down to teach, and I realized that I was a student. I came back a very different person.
So your family were Roman Catholics?
Yes.
And you went through various stages?
Oh yeah.
Infant baptism?
Yes,
communion.
I went to a parochial school through grade 5. We left parochial schools at the end of grade 5. Myself and my sister and the first 3 children, because my parents couldn't afford the tuition any longer. Because the family kept getting larger and larger. And as I said, I'm the oldest of 7.
So the first 3 went through?
No, only through grade 5. I went through grade 5.
And then you went to public school?
I went to public school. I did grade 6 through 12 in
And then public secondary school, high school?
Yeah, 6 through grade 12. 6th grade through grade 12.
Did your 2 older siblings
Older
also go to college?
Yes, yes. The point I'm making is that I encountered incredible teachers in public schools as well. They were all African American. They were there because they wanted to be there. They wasn't there just because they had to buy bread and pay rent. There were so many teachers step into classrooms today. So I met incredible teachers. Some of them I still remember by name. Miss Lincoln, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Lopez, etc. Mrs. Aaron.
So can I ask you, so we could sort of cover as much ground as we can, did you, as a black person who's Catholic, did you feel a kind of apartness? Was there a kind of, even among other, because it's unusual to be then, or in some ways even now.
To be black and Catholic?
Yeah.
Now, what are you asking me? Did I feel some separation from other blacks?
No.
No,
Not
because
that.
not at all.
Not that at all.
No.
Rather, I'm asking you,
It's
a uniquely different
Did
experience.
I experience discrimination within the
No,
Catholic
no
Church?
discrimination either.
Oh,
It's
yes,
just
I did.
something-
No, I did.
Oh, okay, well, I know what kind of discrimination, I'm Roman Catholic, so I know what kind of discrimination you can talk about, where people look at the church and are largely dismissive of it and see it as a kind of,
No, I was
But-
discriminated against because
but
I
I
was
think-
African American.
yeah, but I think it's in the black world, there are people who haven't seen still a black Catholic, believe it or not. It's not, there are only 300,000.
In my community, that was not the
Right,
case.
in your community, wasn't it?
Because remember New Orleans,
That's right.
many people were.
The state is largely.
It's largely Catholic.
Yeah.
So that was that. So
Right.
my next door neighbors were Methodists. We were Catholic.
Right.
They didn't see the
Okay,
experience with that.
but I was just saying the numbers, the total numbers of African American Catholics is only 300,000. We go to something at the cathedral every year for Black History Month, and it's wonderful. The larger amount, even now in the States, are Africans and folks from the Caribbean and Latin America, but not African American. It's the smallest
Yes, I'm aware.
of the denominations.
No, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, so that's all I was asking, and
I misunderstood the question.
yeah, and just people look at it as just very interesting. They've never seen somebody who's
Well, when I was in Fond du Lac, I'll never forget the day when one of the volunteers said to me, Carol, you're the first African American, first Catholic African American I've ever met. So I know that. I've heard that. I know that.
yeah. Are you practicing Catholic?
Oh my God, yes.
Okay.
I'm teaching catechism tomorrow morning.
Where?
At Good Shepherd, of
Oh,
course.
it's Good Shepherd right over here. Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
Oh, I'm a practicing Catholic.
Uh-huh.
I can't imagine not being one.
Right.
Because I understand what it means to be a Catholic. It's to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Not Father John, not Father Tom, or Sister Mary, or Sister Claire. We are followers of Jesus Christ.
Well, I like the fact that
Most
you
people don't
emphasize
know
Jesus Christ, because when people think of Catholics, they don't think of Catholics and they see them as largely disobedient to. They don't think. I'm involved in about 15 organizations with the church, so my commitment is fierce to the church. But I'm saying Protestants, meaning Baptists, Lutherans, even. My friends were very close to Anglicans. The Salvation and Deliverance people, the fundamentalists, the evangelicals, they look at Catholics as almost something close to akin to heathenism, worshiping statues. But I don't want to get into that. I'm just saying, I just noticed that you mentioned Jesus Christ, because that's what you hear among evangelicals, this emphasis on they've been saved and washed by the blood of Jesus Christ, as if Catholics aren't as well.
Well, we know that.
But they will go on with their criticism as centers on a kind of Mariolatry, that they believe that Catholics have this excessive devotion.
But respectfully, there are some Catholics who are
who are Mariolatrists.
Yeah,
excessive devotion to Mary.
Because I know some of them.
Yeah, it's and their thinking is unfinished, as it were. They haven't.
Or they don't
properly
understand that they're disciples of Christ, and as such, you have a work to do.
Yes.
So
to follow the chronology of the arc of your life here. So after 2 years, I think it's amazing being away for 2 years, 64 to 66, in the tumult that was happening in the States. That's what I'm talking about.
I wasn't here. I missed all that. Yes.
Yeah, and
but I've made up for it.
you were doing the Lord's work. Some people would say, not I. Some people would say, well, the mission fields are right here,
And
in the inner city, and in the slums,
and I did that
north and south.
And I did that in public education. As I said to you earlier, my first teaching job was in Ocean Hill, Brownsville.
Right.
And that was the year that it was still centralized. The DOE was still centralized. They made a decision that for every 15 first graders, there would be one teacher. However, they didn't have the physical plant to give each one of us a classroom. I was assigned to teach a first grade class. And I was assigned to teach in a classroom with an older woman, Miss Maskell, whom I will never forget, who had been a social worker for many years and had retired, but still had something to offer. And when I showed up, I said to Miss Maskell, when do we get together to play? I assume we were going to co-teach. And she said, that's your side of the classroom, and this is my side of the classroom. Here are the names of your children. And of course, she had extreme difficulty in maintaining. She struggled, and it became very challenging to teach separately from her in a classroom where there was lots of noise and movement.
So when you came back, you were teaching in public schools.
I went to public school, yes.
Did you ever teach in a Catholic school?
For one semester, that was the. This is an interesting story. When Danny was born, I took the year off, maternity leave.
Your son.
My son.
Your only child.
Yes. Our only son. And at that time, we went to Resurrection Parish for Sunday Mass in Harlem.
Okay, so Resurrection is at by Riverside Drive. No, actually, it's in Central. It's in
Central
Harlem.
Yes.
It's at 155th Street or thereabouts.
Yes.
It's a small parish.
It was,
right?
and Father Lucas.
It's now a chapel.
And Father Lucas was the pastor at that time.
Who's just died recently.
Yes. Oh my God, you know. Oh my God, yes, he did.
He's possibly the most radical priest that I've ever
He was radical.
He's a Pan-Africanist. I don't know if you know that.
No, he was
very radical to his dying day. He also is a licensed gun owner, and he carried a gun. He was a chaplain at Rikers, but he comes out of I think he's initially family originally from the Caribbean.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that January, the teacher of the third grade became ill and couldn't teach. And Father Lopez approached me because he knew I was a teacher and was on maternity leave, and he asked me to teach the class. And initially I said no. I said, I've got a small kid, that's why I'm not teaching in a public school right now. And he couldn't get anyone, and he kept. So the third time he approached me, my husband said, Carol, you have to do this. We have a good babysitter, which was true. We lived in a building where when we needed a babysitter, we got an excellent babysitter. And so I said yes, and so I taught at Resurrection for the second half of that school year. And currently, one of the young girls that was in my class is now my neighbor, Jackie Diaz, and she lives across the street from me.
Where you live now?
Where I live now. She lives at 57 Park Terrace West. I'm at 60. And we socialize. And I know she. Okay. So the
And she
point
was
is,
a former student.
she was in the third grade. I taught her in the third grade at Resurrection. I only taught at Resurrection School for one semester.
What year?
Danny was born in January of 69. 69.
So that spring semester.
Yeah, but from January to June, because the teacher who had been the teacher of that class became ill and couldn't work anymore. Yes, just for one semester.
And then you went.
I went back to public schools.
Oh, so did you take were you able to take a break from? They allowed you to.
Well, the school ends in June. You don't go back to work until September.
Right, but you were working at Resurrection from January to June?
Yes.
But ordinarily, wouldn't you be teaching at your public school in January?
I was on maternity leave.
Oh, you were on maternity leave.
That's why I was.
Oh,
why Father Lucas approached me. He knew I was on maternity leave.
I didn't know they gave maternity leave that early. That's excellent. No, I mean, even today, people are fighting for you know.
I was on maternity leave.
Yeah.
Yes,
So-
for a year, yes.
No, that's excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, today, 2021, there are people, you know, agitating for maternity leave in a number of places.
Well, respectfully, to be a teacher in a public school here in New York City, public schools are far more advanced in terms of benefits and salaries than any place else in the nation.
Thanks to Albert Schenker.
Albert Schenker and John
head of
Lindsay,
it.
because he signed off on it.
You mentioned Lindsay
And,
earlier.
and of course, it's no longer tier 1. I think we're now up to tier 4 because they could never maintain the benefits at tier 1 all those years. And I'm tier 1.
Right, so when you started, John Lindsay had just been elected in '66. He started January of '67. So you and Albert Schenker was there since the late '50s, I think, as head of the teachers union. This cantankerous person who fought unsleepingly for teachers' rights.
He fought for teachers' rights.
Yes.
I've been in the same room with Al Schenker, and I know the energy with which he was, that embodied him.
Force of nature, yes.
He was all that.
Yeah. Wow. So, and there was there a large African American?
My God, no.
Right. That's what
I've taught in schools in which I was the first person of any color to teach.
in the 5 boroughs.
Yes. This was now in the Bronx. District 9. The school is on Popham, just south of Tremont. It's on the northern end of District 9. PS 109. I was the first person of color.
Now,
For 2 weeks, I would go up in the morning going up to my class, and the teacher would say to me, ma'am, you know parents are not allowed until 8:40. And I said, I teach on the 3rd floor in room so-and-so.
so what were the grades you were teaching?
My first assignment, as I said, was first grade in Ocean Hill, Brownsville. In this school, I was assigned to a 3rd grade class because you didn't get to choose. You were certified for grades K to 6, and so the principal made the assignment. You didn't choose which grade you were going to teach. It depended, depending on the needs of the school. Yeah.
So the highest grade you taught was
6th
3rd
grade.
grade.
No,
Oh,
6th
6th grade.
grade.
Okay. What I was going to ask you, there must have been a lot of black teachers just around in general. Teaching is one of those professions that
That's a
African
myth.
Americans.
That's a myth. No, when I came to the system, there were not a lot of us. Yes.
No, but what I'm saying is that
I'm
those
talking
were one of those
public schools.
okay, right, but that was one of those professions in which people could sort of make their
Exactly.
way. It wasn't, you weren't,
I agree.
you weren't a
And-
brain surgeon trying to get a job
Right.
at
We could become
at Fisbro.
teachers
Right,
and nurses.
exactly.
Right, but that doesn't mean that there were
So
lots-
where were the black teachers? Were they teaching exclusively at some
There were
other?
very few black teachers in the 60s in New York City in public schools. That's the point I'm making. People have this myth about racial equality of New York City. New York had a different way of expressing its separation of the races. But it existed. I currently live in an apartment that I could not have lived in when it first was rented, or first built. There was a time when there were no people of color in Inwood at all. We still don't have an African American super in any building here in Inwood. Okay, Mr. Reynolds, God bless his soul, he died a year ago this past February, and his wife, Geraldine, and their son, Bruce Reynolds, who lost his life in the 9/11 World Trade explosion. That family was one of the first, if not the first, African American family to live west of Broadway. And he and his wife lived at 70 Park Terrace East until he died. She died first, and then he died a year ago. And the kids used to give Bruce a rough time. But it's a myth.
But to answer that, the great black novelist, well, he's not known to a great many people, but John Oliver Killens used to say there's down south and there's up south. So it's all south, depending on, with varying degrees. So I'm not making any case for
Do you
New
realize
York.
that we had slaves right here in Inwood?
Not only did you have slaves, you had auction. People were being auctioned off on Wall Street. So yeah,
But I say right here in Inwood.
sure, you have the museum
The
on Dyckman
Dyckman
Street.
House.
Yeah, with the plantation.
But not just
Small
the
plantation.
Ishams, the Shermans, they all had slaves.
Sure. So slavery touched everywhere in the Republic.
And then they
basically.
displaced all of the Native Americans.
Sure.
They took over because they were
I
here.
guess what I was trying to ask you though, is in a big metropolis such as New York City, you would think that there were black teachers. That's not, I know that there were black
Yes, but
teachers.
there were very few of us. And that's the myth. There weren't a lot of us. If you think about the public schools that African Americans have gone to historically here in New York City, that underprepare them didn't prepare them to go to college. Think about it. And I can say the same thing today. Most black and brown children are sitting in public school classrooms where they're being under-taught or not being well prepared.
Well,
And we know that.
Yeah.
That's been documented. That's not Carol
I'm a
Mulligan.
big booster of the public schools.
I'm sorry?
I'm a big booster.
I'm pro
yeah,
public schools
yeah.
as well. But I'm a realist. Until
Right.
you can talk fact, you can't make
Right.
change.
I went to, I did all three. I did church, I went to church school for a number of years, private church school. Then I went to public school, secondary school. Then I went to private university, Columbia University. When I was at a public secondary school, I think back now, the last number of years, I don't remember that many black teachers. Yeah, and that was in from about freshman year in high school was 70, what was it, 70, yeah, 70, God, what am I doing? 74 to 77, approximately. And I remember I went to Harron. Harron doesn't exist anymore, it's a tough school. It was behind, near Fordham, Midtown. It was behind the hospital, Roosevelt Hospital. Time Warner Complex is
I
there now.
know the area.
I think it came down the next year. Just like the 3rd Avenue L, I used to go to school in the South Bronx, a private church school. That L came down the year after I left. That school came down the year after I was there. It's just one of those funny things. Because I always thought the L was there for years. But I was told the L came down in 73, the year I graduated from the 8th grade, or something like that. And that school, I think, stopped being a school. it's a big, beautiful place. It was an all-male school, tough school. It's considered one of the baddies, you know, all male. Then I wound up going to Columbia. It was all male at that point until the 80s. But
Columbia University?
was the last Ivy to be all male. The first co-educational graduate. I think Obama may have graduated in that class in '82 or '83. But I now, when I look back in the last few years, I was thinking, I don't remember, I could count them on an amputated hand, how many black teachers that were at that public school. And then my elementary school was different from the 3rd through 8th grade, were all black teachers, but that was a black, you know, school in the South Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still...
Where in the South Bronx?
I think it was 1122 Forest Avenue, behind Morris High School.
Okay.
Small place.
Yeah. Well, no, there were black teachers, but there weren't that many of us. But why would they be? Why would you expect them to be?
Well, I'm just saying, there must have been a professional class of black people in a big place like New York.
Yes, of course. Yes, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, if you think about all the schools we have, and how many, just the number of teachers in one given school, and even now, in places like District 6, you think there are many African American teachers here, right now?
No, I'm sure.
No.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So you started teaching in 66, 67, and then you taught until...
I left public education in 2001. I spent 33 years.
You made it to the new millennium, new century.
And then I left in June of that year and began to teach at NYU the day after Labor Day of the same year. And I spent another 15 years there. I didn't retire.
So you were teaching at the university level?
Yes, for 15 years.
What were you
I was
teaching?
75 when I retired. It'll be 5 years this coming May. I was in the Department of Teaching and Learning, and my job was to teach young people how to teach mathematics in the early childhood, early elementary grades.
So you'd gone to graduate school?
Of course, you can't teach in New York City without having either 2 master's degrees or a master's degree and 30 graduate credits above.
Yeah, so I guess we sort of skipped over that. I had a professor at Columbia. There was a professor there.
I don't have a PhD, but I have,
Okay.
yeah.
There was a professor at Columbia. And there are professors now who don't have a college degree. A handful of them.
But they were, but they're not,
well, I should say professors, they're
they're
teachers.
instructors.
I don't know what the category is.
That's what, yeah.
There was one guy who was...
I didn't have a PhD either, but I had...
Where did you go to graduate school?
St. John's Graduate Institute.
In Queens?
No, Santa Fe, New Mexico.
You went...
And also City College.
So you went to Santa Fe, New Mexico?
Well, it was a free ride. The Nova Foundation, I was teaching, paid for a master's degree at that institution for New York City public school teachers who were interested in learning to teach using a Socratic approach. You know, not the chalk and talk thing that they still
Conducting
do.
a Socratic dialogue.
And you know, with chalkboard that my teachers used to fill up each morning, have now been replaced by the smart board, and then all they have to do is push a button, and everything they need to say will show up to that. And that's the other reason why our kids are doing so poorly in school, because that's an inappropriate, it's an inferior way to teach.
So you
I did that 4 summers. It was done over the summer, and there were many of us. Some of us, those people who were in the arts, in the art departments of public schools, their degrees were paid for by Mrs. Astor.
Professor.
Yeah, Astor, and mine was paid for by the Nobel Foundation. And the protocol was I learned from another teacher that this was going on, and I made an appointment to be interviewed. And St. John would send someone up on Saturdays, and I forget the location in Lower Manhattan. We go there for the interview. And I remember walking out of the interview and going to a pay telephone, because back then we still had pay telephones, and I called my husband and I said, I'm going. He said, but how do you know? I said, I just have grapevines. I know they're going to say yes. He says, don't do that to yourself.
So did he go? He went with you?
No, he worked. He was a guidance counselor. But our son went with us. Danny went with me, because you could bring your children, but they had to go. They had to go to the daycare. And of course, he couldn't have asked for a better summer, because they went all over in Mexico.
So your husband stayed behind for 2 years and you were there?
No, summers. I said we did this summers. I did this 4 summers. No.
So you did your master's over 4 summers?
Yes. Yes.
And then you did another master's at City College?
I did graduate credits at City College. I studied people like Lillian Weber, Lillian Warren, Vivian Winley, Christina Lee Lumberg. And that's where I really, really learned to teach. And I said that with the deepest respect. Lillian Weber got to studying the infant British school model, which is a child-centered, differentiated approach to teaching, because you're never going to get 20 kids all at the same instructional level in anything. And so you will always studying fractions, but Carol might be still working with concrete materials, and you might be doing multiplication and divisions of fractions, which means the teacher has to have multiple smaller lessons for the unit on fractions. She can't just have one lesson and teach it to all 25 kids the way they do in most of our public schools, especially public schools where poor kids
The way it was done everywhere.
No, not everywhere, only when poor kids are in attendance. Schools in District 2 and Upper East Side, they rock. Some of the best schools in the nation are public schools right here in New York City.
Yeah, but again, I'm on the Upper East Side. There are a handful of really good public schools, which is sad, and the parents have a lot of money. You know, I know people are making $500,000 together, and they're sending their kids to those public schools, and those public schools are basically restricted. You don't see that many black and brown kids at those schools.
Because they don't live in that neighborhood either.
Right. That's how they're restricted.
You can tell the quality of a public school by the zip code. And that also implies the annual income of the parents.
But you know where it doesn't work? It doesn't work with the high schools, because all those other schools like Brandeis on the west side or Julia Richmond Annex that used to be there, may still be there in the 60s, you don't have to live in those areas to go to those public high schools. That's interesting how it's segregated, how that works. I mean, public.
But don't you have to take an exam? But there's an exam.
I went to Julia Richmond Annex one semester out of the 8th grade, and then I made a transfer to Harron High School. So I wasn't living in the 60s. I now live in the 60s. I was in the Village of Harlem.
Yes, but back then, but I think today there's an examination that one must take to qualify.
No, well, let me just say, no. With those public schools, anybody can go.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are not elite public schools.
They're specialized.
Yeah.
Okay, and
For instance,
are they high-performing public schools?
No, they're just regular schools.
Well, that's
Yeah.
the point I'm making.
It would be like Stuyvesant, you know, the high
Well, that's the point
performing.
I'm making. High-performing scholar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and 2 others those are high achieving public schools. But it's interesting. But so we wanted to just get back. You know, you're looking at your watch.
No. It's telling me it's time to stand.
Oh, so you want you
No.
continue and you can stand.
I'm not listening to my watch.
No,
I just wanted to make sure that somebody wasn't trying to reach me.
Oh, okay.
I'm
so
fine.
so what year did you get married?
In 67.
Oh, when you came back. And you met your husband in 67.
No, I knew Dan before I went to Brazil. We had been friends and got married when I came back.
Right. Interesting. And your son was born in 68.
68. A year later.
Right. And you mentioned you have several grandchildren.
Just 2.
Just 2.
A granddaughter and a grandson.
Right. They're at the university?
No, my granddaughter's in high school, and my grandson is he's in the 8th grade. So he'll be going to high school in September.
And when you left it in 2001, you had the offer to teach at City
Well,
College.
No, NYU. I taught at New York University, and this is how this happened. A guy named Tony Cabana, two men, Tony Cabana, Oliver Patterson, made an appointment to come to the district office. At that point, I was working at the district office in District 10. I'll tell you about that. To offer middle school teachers 15 graduate credits in math education, free of charge at NYU. And because of my job, I met Ray Rosenberg, the deputy superintendent, and Carol Mulligan, who at that time was the coordinator of mathematics, met with the two men to discuss what we offer. And of course, we were delighted. 25 graduate credits at
So
NYU.
just for signing up to get 25 graduate credits?
You have to qualify, but they were offering them 25 free graduate credits at NYU. And we had a number of, middle school teachers who didn't have their master's yet. And so that was a win-win for us. So we had our first meeting, and then Oliver and Tony came back for a second meeting. And as I was walking from my office to Ray Rosenberg's office to meet with him, Ray Rosenberg said, "There's a job at NYU. I want you to apply for it. Call this woman and make an appointment for an interview." He had met me once before, that was it. And so I did. Now what he didn't know, I had just submitted my retirement papers. I hadn't told anybody that, because you don't tell your boss that you're going to retire until everything's done.
And at that point, you were teaching for 34 years in 2001.
I left at the end of 33.
Started 67.
33. Well, I took a year off from return. They don't count that. I took a year off. So it was 33 years in terms of financial credit. That's if you want to look at it that way. But yes, and so I applied for the job. Then they asked me to come in and teach, do a demonstration lesson. And the people sitting in the room were all employees. And what I noticed was that they were taking notes, and I was thinking, why are they taking notes? Does this apply to them? And what they were doing was evaluating me. And of course, they offered me the job. And then I thought about it, and I thought, I don't belong there. That's a place for rich kids.
NYU.
NYU.
Yes.
And
Still is.
if I'm going to, but there are also poor kids there. Okay, so then I'll tell you.
Shall we say middle class kids there? Lower middle?
Let me finish. I'll tell you who my students were, because they weren't just rich. Most of them were rich, but there were also students who had done community colleges for 2 years, had achieved high grade point averages, and NYU offered them scholarships. Some of them were Dominican, some of them were African American, and some of them were white. So yes, I had 4 kids in my class. Most of them were very, very wealthy and came from all over the world. They weren't just Americans.
Yeah.
They were, And so I said no. And then one day, a woman named Suzanne Carruthers, African American, full professor, got a hold of my telephone number and started calling me at home, encouraging me to take the job. I said, Suzanne, I know I'm going to work, but I want to support kids who really need me. Your students don't need me. And then she said, this particular evening, she says, Carol, you never know how many windows are in a room until you step inside. And I thought that made sense. She says, we're only offering you a contract for 3 years. And if at the end of the first year you decide you don't want to come back, we can't make you stay. She said, you owe it to yourself to do at least 1 year before you say no. And that did. And so 15 years later, I retired because I just couldn't do 5 days a week anymore. And I was 75. That's my story. But my students came from all over the world, but they also came from community colleges, and they were black and brown, as well as poor white kids as well.
And again, what were the courses that you were teaching?
I was teaching people how to teach mathematics in preschool grades to elementary school grades.
And this was at the undergraduate level?
And graduate. So the graduate students who are working on a master's degree, because you have to have a master's degree to teach in New York City. You know, you can start your job without one. Within 5 years, you must have a master's. And then if you
In
ever
order
want
to teach,
to teach anything in New York City, within 5 years, you have to get a master's degree.
you mean even at a grammar school? Or?
Yes, everybody. Everyone. And then if you want a top salary, you have to get either a second master's or 30 credits above. And that's been true for as long as I've been a part of the system. And so my students were both graduate students and undergraduate students. Initially, I only taught 2 sections of the course, and I supervised student teachers in public schools. And as a result of that, I got to see a cross section of what our public schools look like. I saw more public schools doing that the first 3 years I was there than I had ever seen in all the years I've worked in public schools. And respectfully, if I were a violent person, I'd either be dead or in jail, because I saw teachers behave in ways that was criminal.
Signing off with the interview that we just did with the wonderful Carol Mulligan for New Millennium Oral History Archives in the city of New York. Thank you.